Hello, everyone. This is Claudiu Murgan. I am the host of the Spiritually Inspired Show. And my guest today is Joel Baechle. Joel was born in Cleveland, Ohio, majored in sociology, but also edited the college newspaper for 2 years while participating in the stage band on rhythm guitar. He also took several photography and film courses and had a rock band which performed a version of the rock opera Tommy with the theater department. Joel played the 6 and 12 string guitar. He often thought that sociology was interpreted by employers as socialism, and he soon learned that blue collar and traditional ethnic groups like Jews, blacks, Italians, Poles, Cubans were often kinder to him than the WASP establishment. For 30 years, Joel worked in the motion picture special effects industry while fine tuning his own perception about life, spirituality, and his own purpose in this existence. His interest in things beyond the normal senses began when he started taking photographs that included images that were not there when he clicked the shutter. He had been investigating and documenting the paranormal and vestiges of antiquity when he realized he had taken a photograph on film of an oak tree dryad of sacred Native American land. Joel, thank you for joining me for this interview.
You're welcome.
Joel, we met through a shamanic course, and I realized about you that you are a self-taught person in various subjects, and one in particular is the awakening of Kundalini energy. What is your experience when trying to apply the methods of the course you took?
Well, the course was something offered online, and it's with Roger Chudery, who has quite a following. And I had some experience feeling that type of energy previously, and as happens oddly with me sometimes, I was already becoming aware of an ability to kind of go up and down chakras at will, not to perform any, amazing acts of enlightenment or anything, just being aware of being able to switch my level of consciousness. I could look from my belly and see food and danger, and I could look from my forehead and see opportunities and creativity. Especially when I was lying in bed falling asleep, I seemed to be able to locate these energy centers very freely and just kind of bounce between them. And then this course came along around 6 months later, and I thought, oh, well, there it is. That was my preview, so I started taking it. And what he has done is I would say, taught or revealed techniques which normally I think you'd have to spend many years with the guru to do. He has studied under many different teachers and gurus and learned many different systems, and he was also a successful filmmaker in New York. I don't know what types of videos he did, but he was very familiar with that, and then he went back to India and pursued this. And what he's doing is telling people, this is how it works. This is the physical basis for it. It isn't necessarily mystical. There are definitely physical exercises that change the energy states in the body, and if you simply learn how to do it and practice it, they work. And my one-liner about it is, it does work, but it is work. You do have to put the energy into it, spend the time, remember how to do things, but it works quite well. And some of the things involve being able to tighten your bum, as he says, which is to contract the anus to hold your pressure up, which is the same thing Air Force pilots do to avoid blacking out during high G turns. And you can push cerebrospinal fluid up the spinal column and into your brain, and it functions. And that's one of the very basic things, but it's paramount. And then there are breathing exercises and mudras, various hand positions. There are ways of moving energy around. They're very active outdoor activities that he demonstrates in the park in India. And then he also gets into the yantras, the visual symbols, and we learn that you are not merely gazing at them and waiting for some advance in perception or enlightenment, but you literally, instead of looking at them like this, as you meditate on them, you actually view them like this, rise through them, and you're sitting on top of the image at a higher level of consciousness, and then contemplating everything that you can perceive from there. It's highly effective, not hard, as long as you do it right and do it like he says, bring an empty bowl, leave your plant medicines at home kind of thing. I found it works just marvelously well, and his other people that comment online also seem to think he's really terrific. I unfortunately got so busy I wasn't able to complete the whole course, and I'm trying to get back to it. But there are a number of techniques, particularly that interested me in that it relates cross-relationally to the path on the Hebrew Kabbalah tree of life, and I don't quite remember all the names now, but the doctrine heptarchical that John Dee and the other guy used to advise Queen Elizabeth in Shakespeare's time, where they had these same square patterns with corners and what they call the watchtowers. There are 84 steps on it and 4 watchtowers. And it turns out those are very, very similar to the same Indian representation, simply drawn differently. One of the things you learn in the advanced courses is that in the actual yantras, the way they are truly drawn, there is Sanskrit writing in that very narrow edge of these squares. They're small inscriptions, and each one tells you specifically which siddhi or power that approach gives you. Which, if you walked into a record store or a head shop in the 60s and saw one of these on the wall, that wouldn't be there. You just think you're supposed to gaze at it, or the cover of a Moody Blues album, So it's quite detailed, and it works. I found it to be marvelously effective.
Yeah, it looks like there is science behind it, and it's similar to what I practice, which is Kriya Yoga, and this being told that Kriya Yoga is a scientific method to enlightenment. So it's quite similar. Yes, thank you. We talk about different type of different religions, and we find the Trinity in Christianity, in Hinduism. So there are, let's say, what do you think, in your opinion, are the differences between the Trinity in Christianity, which is Father, Son, Holy Ghost, and the one in Hinduism, which is Sat, Tat, Om? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I've had many thoughts on it, and over the years, if it's a true religious path, there are some that I think get wide of the mark at some point. But the universe works the same way everywhere. I mean, in different corners, it may have different adaptations. There are different trees in the forest, but they all grow by the same principle. And I have been trying for years to try to codify my thinking about what I call spiritual engineering, which, instead of being faith-based and just ask and you shall receive, which has never worked very well for me. In some particular times, it's worked surprisingly, and thank goodness, very well. But usually, it doesn't. And I don't like to ask for things particularly. I'm a self-starter. I like to do it myself. But my recent opinion is God is the laser. All the traditions tell you that you could not look upon the face of God. You can't regard him correctly. You blow your brains right out of your head. It's something like a scene out of Indiana Jones. So you can't look into a laser either. It's a very useful light source, but it can't be used for illumination, and you certainly don't dare look at it. So God is the laser. The sun is the laser beam, which transmits out of it across great distances without losing any of its informational character. And then the universe mother spirit, or the Holy Ghost, is the matrix or the film on which the hologram is projected and recorded. And then we live inside this multi-dimensional hologram, which seems very physical and real, but some of us know that it can occasionally become more flexible than one would think it could be. The simpler version of that is God is the pitcher on the mound, the sun is the baseball, and the Holy Ghost is the catcher's mitt. And the batter doesn't interact directly with the pitcher. The batter interacts with the baseball. And if you think of that as being a three-phase type of system, if you know anything about electricity, household current runs on two phases. It's alternating current that goes back and forth. But three-phase goes like on both sides of a neutral ground. The white wire, at least in America, is called neutral. Red null point between the current alternating back and forth. So I consider that the universe runs on three-phase. And when you get into the central universe where there's no space and time and everything is known immediately, then I consider that to be like direct current. It does not oscillate because it doesn't have to cover the great distances. The universe oscillates on three-phase outside the central portion so that it covers the great distances and sustain the creation. And that's why I call it spiritual engineering, because to me, it doesn't seem heretical in any way, and it also seems like a way to get a mechanical idea of how things actually work instead of just believing.
So the only difference between these two religions, in my opinion, is that Hinduism believes in reincarnation. So why the Christianity doesn't believe in that, and they don't want to accept certain statements in the Bible where Jesus Christ says, in fact, that reincarnation is possible. Why do you think this type of disruption between or difference between the two thinking?
Well, I believe the fundamental divide between East and West is that the Roman Catholic Church, through its agencies, never conquered India or China. Alexander the Great was not capable of conquering India. He gazed out over the Deccan plain, not realizing how big that really was, and he said, "Oh, would there be more worlds to conquer?" But he couldn't get farther than that. For whatever reason, I'm not familiar enough with history to say, but for whatever reason, the Roman version of Christianity and the Greek version of Christianity did not move to the east. They moved to the west and somewhat to the north. And some people would find this to be very offensive, and I won't get very deeply into it, but my opinion is that the Romans put Jesus on the cross in the church and left him there, not only as a reminder that he had died for your sins and would guide you to salvation, but also that's what Rome would do to you if you dared to question him. And when you see the Pope addressing the adoring masses on Easter Sunday, and he has the orb in one hand, the cross, and it's showing dominion over the world, and he has the staff with the cross and the figure of the dead man on it, that is basically showing you salvation and the threat of death at the same time. So I have nothing against the Pope. I think he's a great guy, and he's doing his job as he should. But the symbolism of the Roman Church is not necessarily Catholic, so to speak, in the general sense of the term. So I believe that, anyway, those who would not accept the authority of the church were killed. And it was a way to continue the Roman Empire using a mental and emotional construct rather than an army. And it certainly provided stability. There's no question about it. But it's also been a very rigid system, which doesn't allow, for certain questions, it doesn't allow for change. In the Eastern religion, in India, and in a different way in China, they received teachings from someplace way, way back. The official story is that, I may get this wrong, but Shiva cast herself down and was broken into 38 pieces when her body hit the ground, and they found 37 of the pieces and established a shrine at each one, and the 38th one has not been found, and that's why there are 38 letters in the Sanskrit alphabet. It's something like that. I may not have it quite right, but they have been able to allow mythology and folklore around the fringes of things without bringing down the authority of a central, ecclesiastical government on them. And then if you study and get with the right guru, you can move up and go, very far advanced indeed. So I believe the schism occurs there. Now, there's another aspect to this, which is a little bit different, but Timothy Leary, I don't know who else went with him, but they visited two British expats in India who had remained in India after World War II, and privately were devotees of Krishna, and they didn't welcome visitors, but they agreed to talk with Timothy Leary, and they showed him something which has informed me since then. They took a globe of the world and turned it sideways and showed that it rotates to the east, so that therefore the sun sets in the west. And they explained that humanity has always been climbing towards the rising horizon, towards the setting sun. That is what has driven westward expansion. And the right side is the logos, the more logical, Greek-informed religion and thought has tended to be in the northern hemisphere, and the emotional side has tended to go towards the southern hemisphere. And this explains why the Nordic countries have a different view of these things than, say, when we get down into the Mediterranean region. And I think that's well worth keeping in mind. If you take a globe and look at it that way, a lot of things may occur.
Yeah, very interesting point of view. So, do you think that these days the Catholic Church and the Church in general should evolve with the time and look at the Gospels and the Bible with a fresh look? I mean, there are so many interpretations and translations, and lately there are new findings in the 1945, 1947. You know, the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi Library. Shouldn't they freshen up their image and their perception of the teachings?
Well, again, in my opinion, and people may not agree, in my opinion, the Roman Catholic Church is a fundamentalist church. It is not as narrow-minded as some of the Protestant fundamentalist divisions, one might say. But half of my relatives are Catholic and half of them, so I'm familiar with the Protestant and the Catholic tradition. And what I found at Catholic church services is that if you obey the rules and do what they say and stick with it, it is like being in a big family. It is very welcoming, and you feel very secure and comfortable within that construct. However, if you have some differences with it, particularly issues of birth control and divorce these days, then at least until recently, you were threatened with excommunication, and you would be barred forever, grace of God and so forth, which I think is preposterous. So it needs to change. The problem with fundamentalist sects of any kind is that they follow a rigid scaffolding. You might consider their spiritual progress to be climbing up a ladder or climbing a scaffolding, like Michelangelo, to reach a height. And the more liberal or ecumenical viewpoint is, well, you can climb a rope or you can climb on the rocks. As long as you get there, it's fine. It all goes to the same place. I have lived in Alabama in the southern United States, and I have learned from that experience and also from other pretty much rural areas that whether it's a fundamentalist pastor or a proselytizer with a bullhorn on the street or someone who is engaged in that faith, that they can be very good-willed and the nicest person you would ever want to meet. They will literally give you the shirt off their back if they think you need it, as long as you don't question their structure. Once you put a chip in that mindset, then they can turn pretty quickly and become, more emotional. And I have an anecdote about that. My wife and I were going to attend a Paul McCartney concert in San Jose about 8 years ago, and there was a man with a bullhorn and a big sign, set up that was calling through the bullhorn, "You don't have to burn. Accept Jesus in your heart today. It's okay. You don't have to burn. You can go to heaven." And I called across the square to him and I said, "Paul McCartney isn't evil." And he laughed through the bullhorn, and everybody heard him. And he said, "I didn't say Paul McCartney was evil. All I said was you don't have to burn." I said, "Oh, never mind." And the whole crowd laughed, and I, turned that into a pleasant situation for everybody. Now, I have a good friend in the special effects field that I'm in. He's from Missouri originally. He's a fundamentalist. And he said, "Well, the thing is, I want all you guys to be in heaven with me when we die. I want to see you there. I don't want you guys to be left behind. I want you to come along, and I like you. Why wouldn't I want you there? It's just that I can go to church on Sunday. I know I'm human. I know I'm going to screw up. I'm going to make mistakes. I can be forgiven. It's okay, and you can too. And then we'll all be together. We keep on doing pyro together. It's a very nice way to put it. I have a Jewish PhD professor friend who doesn't agree with that too much, but it's always possible to talk about these things with people who are open-minded. It's when you have people that cling to the structure, they don't want to take the training wheels off their bicycle, that it can be difficult, and it's best just to avoid it.
Yeah, very interesting discussion, and can take hours to dig deeper into something like this. Let's switch to something much more positive. Over time, there are several examples of co-op communities developed by either people of faith or sages, and we had a lot of examples of people from India coming to US and developing these type of communities. And they believe in the power of sharing and helping each other. And there is such a community close to where you live. It's called Ananda Village in outside Sacramento, in fact. So in such trying times, we are encouraged to grow our own food, return to nature, embrace silence and discovery. Do you think that such communities are viable?
I think they are always viable as long as their internal social structure maintains integrity. Buckminster Fuller in Synergetics stated that integrity is one of the most important factors of any organizational structure, whether it's physical or social. I have been on a commune in Tennessee called The Farm that was started by Stephen Gaskin. A friend of mine lived there for several years, and I visited once. And I went out and planted lettuce in the field with the rest of the hippies, and we were rewarded with a candy bar and a can of pop on our break by the straw boss, and then we planted some more lettuce or whatever it was. And the little kids were they were friendly, and they'd come up. I know this one little girl brought me a little scrap of very pretty multicolored cloth and gave that to me as a present. It's only about that big. And to this day, I keep my I Ching coins wrapped in that because I think that was as much a gesture of innocence as you could expect. Nonetheless, there were conflicts between Stephen and other members of the group, and particularly the ones that had come with him from California remained in the inner circle. And people that came along later oftentimes found they didn't have as much access. And I met Stephen on a trail, and we said hi to each other. I know who he was, it's not just a picture. And at one point, most of the people from California that were not as well engaged with the inner circle went back to California. And, but that one held up pretty well. Not everything was done well. They did not take care of their water supply adequately. A lot of people got giardia. And the drug to cure giardia was known to be carcinogenic, and my friend that lived there eventually got cancer and died. Whether that caused it, I have no idea. But you can go from that all the way over to religious communities, which there are many in India, where the women chant and roll incense all day and so forth, and those can work. In medieval times, to some extent, still the brothers, the monks have gardens. Or the Benedictine monks make Benedictine brandy, for example. And you can go all the way over to the other side where things go wrong, and you get Jim Jones or the Aum, whatever it was, called in Japan. Now this gets technical, and I will try to keep it as straightforward as I can. Groups of people who have a common purpose that is not mainstream, particularly occult orders, which I've read a lot about, when they are centered on the personality of a leader and the group mindset, which could be called a thought form, resides in the personality of a leader, they can come to great harm when that leader becomes ill or dies. The whole thing can fracture. One of the examples historically of this would be Muhammad, who founded Islam, had a son. And there were people who believed that Muhammad was the only interpreter for Allah, that he was his prophet and it would never change. And the other half, I think, are the Shiites, are the ones that believe that it descended through the family. And eventually his son was killed, and you have this great schism between them now. So the terminology is an egregore, E-G-R-E-G-O-R-E, egregore is you could call it a spiritual hologram on the astral plane that functions as the clearinghouse for the mindset of a group. And then the other term is eschaton, or eschatological religious studies, meaning things pertaining to the end of the world. And the statement on that is, the more dramatic the eschaton, the stronger is the egregore. And what that means is the more closely held a vision of a terminal conflict and the end of the world, then the stronger that binding mindset will be. It's less flexible, holds people in. That would be your Jim Jones example. So in communal environments, first of all, growing your own food is farming. Farming is work. Some groups don't want to use, no artificial fertilizers, no pesticides, no Roundup. Like the Amish, for example, they don't use, gas or diesel-powered tractors. Everything is done with horses. They can ride in a car. They can ride on a train. They're fine, but they just won't own one. Drive it. And they hold up. Whatever the center of their mindset is, it evidently works. Yeah. When hippies leave Philadelphia and go to West Virginia and buy land and decide to start little communes down there, sometimes they find out that it's work, that you get hot and flies are biting you, and you really if you want to grow your own food, you got to get out there and do it. So it really depends on, I think it's almost like having a business plan. You have to decide what you are going to do and what you aren't going to do. And if it was up to me, I would make it like spokes on a wheel and little gears running around the outside, that if people wanted to have a side gig that was off the farm, so to speak, that would be fine. If it brings some money and if you can help us, that's okay. Just don't try to change the whole setup. When I was in college, the last year and a half, I had an opportunity to rent a very nice big house on the edge of the next town down the road. And we had a co-op just for our food, and we all put in $7 a week. And we would go to Kent, Ohio, where Kent State University is, which many people have heard of, and we go to the food co-op there. We buy a big block of cheese, and we buy beans, and we buy wheat and rice, and we make our own bread and things. And we were all good friends, and we all liked the same music, the Allman Brothers and Grateful Dead and everything. And it worked. And we were very close bonded, little household of between about 8 and 11 people at various times. So that's the only experiment I've done. But I think it takes, like the E says, the Army needs a strong man who leads from the center. And, disagreements have in a way that resolve favorably for individuals and don't diminish the integrity of the group. That's about as close to that as I get.
Yeah, I mean, even Ananda village communities have one leader at each location, in India or Italy or in US. And I think they pass the torch down as soon as the leader dies. So, yeah, it's an interesting concept which we have to study more. I recently came across this statement that I think fits you perfectly to answer. Your inability or unwillingness to forgive your fellows is the measure of your immaturity, your failure to attain adult sympathy, understanding, and love. What's your take on it, sir?
Yeah, that's a good one, and I've heard that before. I believe the operant term is fellows. It applies to anyone in their church, or it applies to anyone in their faith, as long as the other guy that you were rocking to is a Baptist too or whatever. Well, get together, they bring a third party in and talk or whatever the case may be. I'm not picking on Baptists. One of my very best friends is a Baptist minister. So I'm hardly unfamiliar with that. But you have to determine who is a fellow. Jesus did not preach to the Arabic tribes farther out from the area that he worked in. They felt that they were not ready for the message. Muhammad came along and at least got rid of the household idols and the household gods and imposed monotheism on them. Jesus didn't take that to them. So there's an example. This is just a little aside, but there's a difference between lying and simply withholding information. You don't have to tell everybody everything you know, and you don't have to necessarily try to convince everybody of everything you know. That's not deception. You can call that discretion is the better part of the valor. Outright lying or diverting a subject and changing it to something else is a completely different animal. So, what we in terms of civil structures, which as Bismarck in Germany said, warfare is simply an extension of diplomacy, which is a good thing to keep in mind. There are people who are not your fellows. There are people who have no intention of being on the same page as you. I just read a book recently about this, but Hitler, Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, Kim Jong-un, Robert Mugabe in the Congo, Idi Amin. There are people who are so wholly sociopathic and have risen to a point of absolute tyranny because the social structure had become weak enough to permit it, that I don't know that it's within the human frame of reference to forgive them, even among their peers. There's a sword in Edinburgh Castle, which I've seen in Scotland, engraved on. It was an execution sword, big one, and it was engraved, "May God be more merciful than we." So we're sending you to a higher authority because we just don't know what else to do with you, So there is all that. I have a statement. I dug out the collected works of Plato yesterday. I have a brief statement I'd like to read, if I may. May I do that?
Yes.
So in Plato's Republic, Part 5, Section 473, Paragraph D, until philosophers rule as kings, or those who are now called kings, and leading men genuinely and adequately philosophize, that is, until political power and philosophy entirely coincide, while the many natures who at present pursue either one exclusively are forcibly prevented from doing so, cities will have no rest from evils, Glaucon, nor, I think, will the human race. So in other words, in the current American political situation, one of the things we don't have is a test for whether a person is truly fit for public office. Now, in some cases, that's good. There are some doctors and some lawyers who can throw their hat in the ring, and they're definitely the right man or woman. They're well suited, whether they've served before or not. There are other people who are, businessmen, for example, who are not well suited. They're dictatorial. They think everyone should answer to them like a CEO. And I do believe that there should be a test for civil service that you can't serve it. I mean, I don't mean it to sound this arbitrary. For example, you can't run for mayor if you haven't served on the city council. You can't run for governor if you haven't been a mayor. You can't run for Congress if you haven't been a governor. You can't run for Senate unless you've been in the Congress, state Senate, national. You can't run for president if you haven't served at least 6 years in some, fairly high-powered government agency. Now, as I say, there are people who don't need to do that and are great. I don't necessarily agree with that statement I just made, but the problem is we have no means at this time of measuring a person's integrity. Many people thought that Trump would grow into the office, and once he got off the campaign trail, he'd settle down with the business of actually governing, and is widely viewed as not having occurred at all. So the does not always have that effect. So getting back to the point of forgiveness, on the divine level, it is said that even Lucifer and Satan were offered forgiveness at one time, and were they to truly repent, they could possibly even be, if still even in existence, but they even now, if they were sincere, they might be given a path to eventually move back into the universe structure, although they never have authority again. It's considered that since their behavior borders on cosmic insanity, that it's highly unlikely they would ever be sincere about anything. But the universe works that way. But the difference is universal beings are immortal. There's no time. It could take 1 trillion years for them to finally work off their karma, but they would have that time. We have a very brief span in which to perform. And I'll interject another little quote. I admire the Dalai Lama from Tibet very much. I think he's a terrific guy. I've never heard him speak, but I like to see, what he says. And there's a quote from him: "The purpose of life is to be happy." Well, as advice to not get hung up in things, that's fine. But the purpose of life isn't to be happy. The purpose of life is to survive death. That's the only single thing you have to master. Everything else is irrelevant. If you believe that you can survive death, the only reason we're here is to learn enough to get through to the other side and continue on. And so the concept of forgiveness goes back to the Christian beliefs that you shouldn't serve as a judge and jury. If a bandit attacks you and you can fight him off and he runs away, let him run away. Don't throw a stone after him and kill him. Let him run away. Maybe he'll think better of it and not do it again. In the days before firearms, the days before long-range standoff weapons, that was a very sensible point of view if you could do it. There's the well-known, I don't know if it's a parable or not, but if someone forces you to carry the load for them for a mile, go ahead and carry it the second mile. Go the extra mile. Let them see that you're willing to cooperate. You're not against them. That doesn't work when you have an active shooter on the 14th floor in Las Vegas firing randomly into a crowd. You can't approach the person. You can't communicate with them. Events are unfolding so fast that you don't even know where it's coming from. And I guess if you could capture the guy alive, that's fine. But there's no negotiation involved. In a home invasion robbery, and things like that, there comes a point where your animal instincts are going to have to come to the fore. You have a right to defend yourself. So we try to leave it up to the civil government. That's why we try to have fair, unbiased trials, and that's why it's been found that way too many people have been sent to death row when later on the DNA evidence showed they committed the crime. Could have been they weren't very nice people, but they definitely did not kill that person, and there's a lot of bias. So forgiveness should be built into the civil structure as much as possible. But I don't think my inability to say to forgive a Hitler or a Stalin means I'm immature. They were social aberrations that rose out of culture that they grew. I'll just throw in another little quip. Does anybody know why Hitler trimmed his mustache that way?
No, why?
He trimmed it so it would fit under his gas mask in World War I. That was the reason he ended up with that. So it's interesting to know there are reasons for things, even though that's irrelevant to the conversation. You should try to forgive if you possibly can. Anyone who's raised children who lives in a community knows that.
And for me, forgiveness comes also from the notion of unconditional love, because you have that type of love, then forgiveness is there. It's kind of by default, and you don't have to, strain yourself to forgive or force yourself to forgive. It's in place. It's by default. Moving forward quickly to a book which is very controversial, if I can say so, Urantia. I know you read the book. I did not have the chance. I just browsed it. What is appealing to the book? What triggered your interest?
Until I moved away from east of the Mississippi, I lived on very extremely meager means for a long time. And a friend of a friend had a copy of the Urantia book, and a lot of people pronounce it Urantia as far as it goes. And he had traded a bag of marijuana for the book to somebody else. And he had this book, and I saw it at his house. This was up in Ashtabula County, which is along the Lake Erie, coast towards Pennsylvania. And he said I could borrow it for a while if I wanted to. They had read it, and I spent an entire winter with. We did a few interior painting jobs in the city, but we had a lot of time on our hands, and I eventually read the whole thing. And I found that its philosophical construct had tremendous integrity. It held together very well. And I have met with some people in the Urantia Group Foundation and been to a meeting once. And I have an issue with them in that they only talk about the fourth section of the book. They really like the part about the life and mortal ministry of Jesus, who's referred to as Christ Michael, one of the Creator's sons. And they, to a large extent, make a church out of it. It becomes a belief system, even though their central organization is called the Urantia Book Information Service. And I am much more interested in the first three parts of the book, which is the organization of the central universe, the evolution of the material universes, and the history of our planet. The history of our planet is the thing that really fascinates me, and it goes into great detail about the Lucifer rebellion and exactly what happened and what events eventuated from that. And I know there are some things in it that I don't quite agree with. There are a few things, like it says there are exactly 100 elements, and if you study them carefully, you'll see that they're organized into 10 distinct patterns. Well, I'm very familiar with the periodic table. I don't see that. I've tried organizing it kind of like a Fibonacci spiral, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, up to here to the middle and then back down. I've tried taking technetium out of it. I think it's element 43, but it's 34. I don't know. But it's not a heavy element, but it's radioactive, and it can not found in nature. It can only be made in a reactor. Some of that doesn't really hold with me. When a person dies, their soul is taken by seraphic transport to Havona, which is an architectural, well, actually Jerusalem, which is an architectural world. It's not illuminated by a sun. The sky glows from basically electrical energy, and so it cannot be seen through a telescope. It's a little bit like in Peter Pan, first star to the right and straight on till morning, that line. It says that they are resurrected on the third day. And seraphim travel at just under the speed of light. So if you calculate 3 days at the speed of light, you get something like, 48 trillion miles or something. It's about, 35 times the distance from the sun to Pluto. And I have to wonder, there has to be, a waiting period before takeoff, and I think there has to be a certain arrival time when they get there. So maybe it's really only 2 days at the speed of light. And I'm wondering, well, how far away is that really? It's supposed to be in the direction of Sirius. This is where it's located. So there are some small things like that. There are, definitions of the races, which I won't get way into, but there are 7 colors of races: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. And it says that the orange, green, and indigo races are inferior to the red, yellow, and blue races, and they're usually enslaved. And eventually they, crossbreed, hybridize, and are absorbed into the general population. And each one appears individually. And in our world, for some reason, they all appeared in the same family at the same time. There were 17 or 18 kids, and they turn different colors as they were born, which I think is true, because in the Hopi tradition, they say that we are all related from the same family, and we all have different colors and fragrances, just like you would see among flowers. I think the Hopi tradition may be the oldest physical human record that we have. So I do believe that, but for that reason, the red man didn't roam the earth for millennia on his own and get established. Everybody started at the same time, and it says the indigo race, the blacks, were the last to leave their ancestral homeland, and the yellow race, because of their greater organizational skill, were able to drive the red race across the Bering Strait into North America, even though the red race had mastered the bow and arrow, which was a standoff weapon. So, you know, that's what I like about it. I agree with some people. I don't know that I agree with every single bit of it. It's somewhat colored by the times it was written in, but there are pieces of information in that you couldn't possibly get anywhere else. And it allowed me to read many other books and compare them with that as a reference point. Getting a little off the track, but one of the things I hold to is that there's a reason there's a hole in the middle of a long playing record. There's a reason there's a hole in the middle of a reel of recording tape. There's a reason there's a hole in the middle of a CD. So we got solid state memory and electronics. You know, there's a reason why an axle is in the center of the wheel, unless you purposely want it to be eccentric to certain mechanical applications. And if you know where the pole point is, if you know that you don't have to understand how the consciousness works, or how did it come into being, or how long has it been there, what is the true nature of God, or anything like that, as long as you accept the fact that there is a center to this, that at some eventual point at the other end of the line, you can find out where all this started from, then everything else tends to make a lot more sense. And again, one of these fundamentalist mindsets you run into, where they want to say the Earth is only 7,000 or 8,000 years old, and we can't possibly be evolved from monkeys. You see a bumper sticker that shows a gorilla looking upward and says "Our Father?" ? And all that, And my answer to that is God created evolution. Get over it. Evolution allows life forms to adapt specifically to the planet they are evolving on, and we're not the only one by any means. There are many, many that are just very, very far apart. So that's what that book did for me, and I believe I figured out through a very, very good book about the legend of Atlantis. I'm quite certain I know where the Garden of Eden was and what the eventual disposition was of that area, and then it explains why various people around that area were affected by it. Of course, this goes back to the cradle of civilization, the Tigris Euphrates Valley, although that's not quite where it was. But yeah, I like it. To me, it's the best reference there is. But unlike the people who are in the organization, I ask a lot of questions, and I use it as a research tool. It is not a church.
Yeah, it seems like an interesting read. I will get to it. In fact, I was quite intimidated by its thickness and the fact that it's printed on a very thin paper, like Bible type paper. And I said, you know what, I can read 20 books and at the same time I will read that one. So I had to choose my battles. Joel, it was great having you on Spiritual Inspire Show. Always a great discussion with you. Learn a lot. Thank you for joining me.
Well, I am very grateful and honored to be in our little group that developed out of Hank's course. And I'm very happy to still be involved in this. And we're an example of a group of people that have been leaderless for a period of over a year. We all get along fine.
Right.
So thank you very much for inviting me, and it's been great talking with you.
Thank you. And to everyone else who's watching the show, please subscribe, click on the bell so you get notified when the next video is published. And until next time, love and gratitude. Thank you all.